Outlive 25 is a remaster of the cult Brazilian-made real-time strategy game from the turn of the millennium. Being the first worldwide distributed game from a Brazilian developer in 2001, Outlive represents a milestone in Brazilian game development. And thanks to this remastering, it is now possible to play this classic game on modern Windows with an enhanced user experience, smoother high-fidelity graphics, and increased fluidity. With this fresh coat of paint, it's easy to appreciate what this RTS has to offer. Rewarding micromanagement and strategic base building, and a charming and often campy turn-of-the-century styling that you could really only get under the production conditions that spawned this game.
Are you ready to be dominated? And you better get back to work. I'm giving the orders here.
I think you can see what I mean. With enough distance and time from that original release date, it's easy to appreciate Outlive, kind of like how one can appreciate an entertaining film from years past. But much like some of the most beloved cult movies at release time in Europe and North America, many actually did not view this game with that same level of appreciation that I have now. See, shortly after Y2K, the PC gaming platform was undergoing immense structural changes. Popular genres and game series were going online, and sometimes fully foregoing a single-player campaign. With 3DFX's demise, there were now only two key graphic vendors that were becoming the dominant forces driving 3D accelerated PC games. And 3D acceleration was becoming the standard way PC games were rendered. CPU rendering was on life support at this time. To play hot new games with good graphics and performance, you really needed a hot new GPU. In this era of rapid change on the platform, a smaller Brazilian studio named Continuum Entertainment developed Outlive, which you're seeing on screen now, that original version running on period-correct hardware. A game that in many ways was out of step with the aforementioned trends of the era. Continuum's Outlive was anachronistic. Literally in the sense that the game was developed in the late 90s, building off the technology of its predecessor, Extinct from 1997, and then fully releasing to market in 2000 in Brazil. The game was released in 2001 in North America and in Europe, as you can see on my boxed copy here of the game, which was published by Take-Two. Essentially, a big chunk of the PC gaming world only played the game a good deal later after its initial release date, in a rapidly evolving market. Along with this out-of-step release timing, the game itself was also functionally and technically anachronistic at release time in 2001. In 2001, the real-time strategy genre had largely embraced 3D accelerated graphics after influential releases like Homeworld. The mostly 2D graphics of years prior, found in games like Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun or StarCraft, were now being seen as outmoded and even undesirable. That much can be seen in the era's advertising, where hot new RTS games had their 3D technology front and center as a big bullet point to catch a prospective player's attention. 3D was in, and 2D was out. Outlive had none of that 3D fanciness of its competitors, instead looked more like games such as StarCraft or late 90s Command & Conquer. It forewent high resolution and high-end 3D acceleration. It presented itself in a simple 640 by 480 resolution with sprites designed around that resolution completely. Essentially, all of the game's technical presentation was 2D art, which was synthesized from 3D offline renders made in 3ds Max, that were actually based on hand-drawn comic inspiration and sketches. This gives the game a super clean, rounded, aliasing-free presentation, which is vastly different from early 3D of that time. There is a great consistency to art made in this way, where really nothing looks out of place. Now, this early 3D CG look nowadays has many adoring fans, myself included, and it is appreciated for its timelessness when compared to early 3D of this time, which is actually rather rough. In fact, this art style of 3D to 2D is so popular that new indie titles such as Dwarf are continuing this stylistic tradition in 2026. While the aesthetic is loved nowadays, at the time of release in North America and Europe and in 2001, Outlive was criticized for lacking the high-end 3D real-time technology of its contemporaries. Going back to reviews, it is a common point of criticism leveled against the game. So something which we can appreciate now was then seen as old school, and not necessarily in a positive way. Reading the reviews, not a lot of the reviewers got past its technical presentation and just often said the game copied older Blizzard and Westwood games. It is of course true that these games were direct inspirations for Outlive, and the original developers readily say that much, but we now know in 2026 why Outlive looked the way it did in Western release in 2001. So that later Western release is how I had contact with the game, and this game was the first Brazilian developed title to see worldwide distribution. I would venture though that this game primarily targeted Brazilian market realities first and foremost, and North American and European reviewers in 2001 probably had little to no knowledge of that. Outlive's somewhat outmoded technical presentation, which was criticized at release, was actually a massive plus point in Brazil. The game's 2D graphic stylings ran well on a wide range of hardware. And in my opinion, not targeting the high-end 3D graphics made the most sense for that domestic Brazilian market there at the time, where according to my Brazilian friends around during that era, even a mid-end PC with a GPU would be unreasonably costly for many people and could be the equivalent of many, many months of salary. So Outlive's primarily CPU-based rendering of sprites massively broadened the game's potential base of customers where it mattered most. So although the game was released in the early aughts, it ran fine enough on a PC from more than a half a decade earlier. And that definitely was not the case for other famous RTS games in its release window. To test that out, I loaded the game up on a Windows 95 PC that is actually below the game's printed minimum specifications, a Pentium 133 machine. After installing the game and updating DirectX libraries, the game ran with a playable frame rate with no sound problems, stutters, or other compatibility issues. All you really needed to get this game running was a Pentium-based x86 CPU, Windows 95 at a minimum, and a sound and video card driver that nominally supported DirectX 7. And I don't even mean actual hardware DirectX 7 support, just driver signage really. That Pentium 133 running the game as you see right now is a CPU from 6 years prior to game release. The game's running fine on it. On hardware from the release time in 2000 or 2001, as we're seeing here, the game is barely a blip on the utilization of a later Pentium 3. That broad compatibility made the game have many fans, as many different people with different specs could play it, especially in Brazil. This then coupled with a high level of modability, with the game shipping with a level editor and scenario editor, giving the game legs over time, and a growing community with many custom maps that continued on long after the early 2000s. The game endured, so much so that the original developers at Continuum decided to rekindle development and bringing out this remastering 25 years later. So what does this remastering bring to the table for the classic game? A game that works for one. Installing that old exe via CD or otherwise to modern Windows sees the game just not functioning at all in my experience, crashing silently with Windows asking if everything's alright. The remaster of course works fine, natively on Steam for example, with quick and easy loads. Then you have proper screen calibration. The original was designed around a 4x3 interface, where the modern release works well with widescreen resolutions. The user interface now fully fills that added-in space from widescreen monitors with more useful information buttons and more artwork than the original 4x3 could fit without any stretching. This applies to menus as well, which all work with the new aspect ratio. And while peering at this main menu here between the original on the left and the remastered version on the right, I think you can notice the most obvious effort that this remastering has achieved. The artwork in the background is much higher res. Not only that, it's more animated too, and it extends to the left and right naturally with no cutoffs. This new menu art is fully faithful to the original style while extending it. It has that same 3D to 2D pre-rendered CG style. This level of faithfulness in the art is achieved due to the game using the original artwork backups as a base for the remastered art. Here, the developers at Continuum had access to the original CDs and storage media that stored the master files for the game's artwork, so the team was fully capable of touching up that original work, editing it, and exporting it at incredibly higher resolutions. Hence why the menus, the user experience elements, and most importantly the gameplay environments, buildings, and units look like pixel-perfect remasters of the original. It looks like the way your mind remembers the game looking back in the day, but now with that modern resolution and fidelity. Looking up close, you can just see how much of a jump it is. A lot of remasters are often forced to post-process the original artwork or remake it from the ground up, which invariably loses some of that styling, or can have compromises with artifacts and misinterpretations. Not here. You get that original look and even more, as the previous 480p pixel grid design can now show detail that those 3ds Max renders actually always had, but were just hidden behind the original technical limitations from the export resolution. Having the original artwork is such a rarity for remasters of games with 2D art, and the fact that Continuum managed to have these assets is nothing short of miraculous when you compare it to other projects that do not have this luxury. Beyond the technical resolution, you're also getting updated artistic design in some other areas. Missions in the original game had a semi-unceremonious beginning, just starting with some text prompts in the top left corner. In the new game, you get enhanced text prompts and cinematic camera crawls, following moving units or highlighting areas of interests, objectives, or just there for setting the mood. That on top of just generally adjusted mission map layout at times in the original campaigns, including a new preview campaign, which appears to cover a bit of the game's background story, taking place perhaps before the original human campaign begins. That's a lot of new content on top of packed-in community maps, multiplayer, co-op, and it's all coming out on April 30th of 2026. While Outlive was a game that was perhaps not appreciated as much as it should have been in Europe and in North America in 2001 due to expectancies of 3D rendering and the closeness to other iconic releases, this remaster will give you hands down the best way to experience this cult classic without the pressures of the millennium to affect one's enjoyment. Playing it with some distance from that era will reveal a game that deserves more respect than it got, especially for its campaign quality and for its art design. If you're a fellow fan of 3D to 2D artwork like me, this game is overflowing with that aesthetic of clean, Phong-lit, hard surfaces, and it's not easy to miss out on if you like that kind of stuff. And with that being said, this is the end of this video brought to you by Digital Foundry and Continuum Entertainment, giving you a retread of this less well-known RTS from years past. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, follow on social media, and as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen!